The Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Gilmer, Stephen P., Ryan K., Matt aka Stormageddon, and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, you get a giant man-eating eagle. You get a giant man-eating eagle. Everybody gets giant man-eating eagles. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it is a Patreon poll topic episode. That is right. A couple months ago, I did a poll called PS4 More Like PS More, which is not a rhyme. It's a slanted rhyme at best, but I if not lazy. So here we are. It was a bunch of PS4 games that went up against each other. And the winner, if you couldn't tell by the title of this episode, was The Last Guardian, Fumita Ueda's third. I don't know if it's his third game for sure. I should probably have looked up his credits before this, but it's definitely not his third game. He's done a couple. He's done 5 now. Anyway, it's his most recent game after Shadow of the Colossus, and it's also his last game until the more recently announced it's like a Project Robot is kind of like what the working title is, I believe, of it. There's a new game that was recently shown at the Game Awards. But joining me to discuss everything that of The Last Guardian and everything of Backlogs is my good friend Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog. Dave, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you for the invite. I'm excited to talk about this game. I played this for the first time recently, and I had a really special experience with it. So I'm flattered that you gave me the invite to come on and talk about it. It's super interesting.
Well, I mean, it seems to be like this is a theme with me where you will cover a game on the show, and then it just so happens that like it's on my backlog. So I'm like, well, I'll see if my patrons vote for it. And then they vote for it and it wins. I'm like, well, I guess Dave is a perfect pick because if it was a game that you didn't like, I wouldn't have invited you on. But I remember seeing you post about it on Twitter back when everyone still used Twitter.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Fuck that place. Anyway, but back when everyone still used Twitter, you posted about how much you were enjoying it. I'm like, oh, then Dave might be a really good pick for this because I don't know who else to get right now. And I will get any chance possible to have Dave back on the show. So I think this is actually the first time you've been on since the 10th anniversary. And I don't know when you were on before that. I think it's been a minute since the Final Fantasy draft, I think was the last
Final
main
Fantasy
episode.
Fantasy
like
draft.
Over a year ago.
Yeah. It all blends together. I mean, I've been on the show almost like a handful of times now. We did Spec Ops: The Line together too. But
that was the other Patreon poll that I stole from you that you covered like a couple months prior.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, a lot of these games, they're really fun to talk about, and I appreciate that I keep getting the invite back.
Well, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, you were just on the draft this year. I'm losing my goddamn mind. So you were on the 10th anniversary episode in July.
It's okay.
And you were on the Final Fantasy draft from this year in August.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so we as per usual though, we're gonna talk about our experience, like how we first kind of discovered or played this game, and how we like our kind of earliest experiences or memories surrounding it. So Dave, I want to throw it over to you. Kind of how did you first hear about this game, and then how did you kind of first get into playing it?
So This game, like, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but it had a super long development cycle. It was in
Hmm.
development hell. It was announced and then it came out like 7 years later or something. Like, it had like a wild development process, but I had never heard of it until I got a PS4 for the first time in like, it was like 2019 or something, like
Hmm.
2020 maybe, when I got a PS4. And I played Shadow of the Colossus because I never had a PlayStation console before the PS4.
Oh wow, I
So
didn't know that. Okay.
yeah, so I played the Shadow of the Colossus remake, and I really love that. Of course, I mean, like, if you don't like Shadow of the Colossus, I'm not going to make a sweeping statement, but like, it seems
Fuck's
like
wrong with you?
everyone loves. There we go. You make the
I'll say it.
statement. I
It's
don't
my
have to.
podcast.
I adore Shadow of the Colossus. It's like one of those things in life that it lives up to the hype. Not everything lives up to the hype, but Shadow of the Colossus did. So I played that. I loved it, and then I started to, especially if I really like a game, I'll read about it. I'll read about its history, its creators, and stuff. And this was before I was as plugged in as I am now. Um, so I read, this person who made Shadow of the Colossus and led this team, we'll say, made another game, The Last Guardian, that's also on PS4, and I think it was on PS Now, as it was called at the time, but I didn't play
Hmm.
it because I had just read some divisive stuff and I was playing other games. Not to get too deep into it, but I didn't play games for like 3 to 4 years. I just like didn't play anything, and I missed the entire beginning of the PlayStation 4 generation from like 2015 to 2020. So I was catching up on all the stuff that I missed. And so The Last Guardian just kind of got pushed to the side. And then you and I ended up covering Eco on my podcast.
Hmm.
And so I played that. I wanted to go back and play the first one before going into the most recent one. So I went from Shadow of the Colossus, then played Eco, and then made it a point to put The Last Guardian in my Discord server. We do a backlog resolutions challenge. Like, we make our resolutions at the beginning of the new year. Here's some stuff in our backlog we promise we're going to play this year. And The Last Guardian was on my list. It was like, it's time. It's time to play this. Like, I loved Shadow of the Colossus. I liked Eco a lot. And then, I want to play this new thing, this divisive thing, right? It's got a pretty divisive reputation.
Hmm.
So I played it for the first time early 2024 when I played The Last Guardian for the first time. So I'm very new to this one. And overall, you know, Fumito Ueda has had this cachet in the industry for decades now at this point, but I'm pretty new to these games as well. It's been like a joy catching up on these, even though there's only three of them that like have the notoriety, this kind of loose trilogy. I'm having a good time catching up.
He is definitely one of the more interesting game developers and directors because we're gonna get into it. His game design ideas and philosophy are so counter to a lot of stuff you see in the industry, but it doesn't.
Yeah,
But it's like it. How can I put this? It's like he makes things purposely obtuse, but never to the point where you feel it's unfair. And it feels
yeah.
so well designed that it feels natural. We'll get into it in more depth, but
Well, part of it too is like, when you start reading about it and you start to realize like Ueda is it's almost like one of those people where it's like this he is your favorite game developer's favorite game developer. Like,
mhm.
super influential for people like Kojima and Miyazaki from Software. Like, these people adore the the approach that Ueda takes in his games. And so reading that makes me want to go play, even though, like, Eco might not be like a perfect play experience or something. It's super influential for a lot of people. So I wanted to go see it.
Well, for myself, for The Last Guardian, I actually bought it when it came out. I loved Shadow of the Colossus. I never played Eco until I covered it for my show. I joked when we covered it on Tales from the Backlog that like I did such a shit job on my own show that I had to redeem myself by coming onto yours and fixing the shit that I did wrong on mine. And I think I think our episode on it's actually like genuinely really good. Not to toot our own horns, but I really like that episode on Tales. And so uh I played Shadow of the Colossus, really enjoyed it, finally got around to Eco, and your show really was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. The Last Guardian, when I first played it, I actually got a chunk of the way into it, and like a lot of my games before I had a podcast, I would play a little bit of it and then it would just kind of roll. I would just kind of bounce off it. Not even because I thought it was bad, I would just lose interest. And it's hard for me. I found what the podcast has helped me do is hold interest on games that I would have lost interest in earlier. And that I don't think that's necessarily even a criticism of this game or games that I bounce off of. I find that just for me, sometimes it's just hard. It's hard for me to really sink my teeth into games sometimes. So having the podcast has been such a benefit, a boon to me, because I've toughed out moments where I was less interested, and because of that I end up having some really nice experiences, like with the game we're talking about today, The Last Guardian, where, spoiler alert, I did enjoy it. I don't know if I'm as high on it as you are, but I still really enjoyed my time with it. I was happy I finished it.
Hmm.
um and so I guess we can just dive in to this. I mean, I don't have a lot to say in terms of story. We'll save the story to the end, but like there's not much of a story to this. You know, there is a plot twist, kind of. Not kind of. There is a plot twist, towards the end of the game and as the cutscenes. But I guess the way we can talk about how the story is told is, and at least the setup for the listeners or for anyone who may not have played it yet. You play as this unnamed boy, this unnamed protagonist who awakens in a cave next to a giant uh, bird-like creature, and that's where you first meet Trico or Toriko, and we'll get into. I love Toriko for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah.
Even in the name is so cool, and I'll kind of go into a little bit more why in a second. But it's hostile towards you at first until you take the spears out of its side, and then you are able to get rid of its shackles. Like it's chained up, and you get rid of its shackles and its helmet, and then it kind of, you and this creature, form this begrudging relationship, and eventually as the game progresses, it, like, your relationship builds and it becomes like a genuine affection and love for each other. Like that's not a spoiler, like that's something that you could totally see is going to happen, like where the game's going to go from the very beginning. Like that's, they're not trying to hide it. And then what happens as you are trying to escape from wherever you are, this weird like prison type of place, you see flashbacks of how that kind of present how the boy and Trico come to be, like how they come together, how they first awaken in that cave, and why both of them are there. And that's kind
Yeah.
of the basic setup for the game. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you'll also, like, as you go through the game, you'll get glimpses into, because the whole game takes place in this giant crater almost. It's like a crater, but it has these big walls that separate it from the outside world, and they're like, you're in this giant, like, mega structure of a long lost civilization in there. And so you'll learn about, that civilization. You'll learn a little bit about how it used to run, what what the purpose of these things were, and stuff like that along the way. So you'll learn a little bit about the past, and then you do go through that kind of like a boy and his dog type story as you go through here. One of the cool things that I liked is, in the opening credits of The Last Guardian, it's presented as a like a picture book going through all
Mm-hmm.
the animals of the world, and it starts
Yeah.
out with some real animals, like from the real world, and then they start to get a little bit more fantastical, and then the last one, is a picture of a Trico. And I believe there's a cutscene at the beginning too with a kind of narrator that talks about how Tricos are these like man-eating beasts. And then your character wakes up in this cave with one of these man-eating beasts. So you're immediately like put on edge, the
Hmm.
Trico doesn't like you. Um, but you have to figure out how to get out of the situation that you're in. So I think it starts out with a lot of like mystery and fantasy and intrigue and stuff, and then the game continues with that trademark Ueda type storytelling where you'll get some cutscenes where things happen, but like you never sit and have someone like tell you what's going on in the story
It's
in
all
these
done through
games.
environment.
Yeah,
Like
through
every
environment, through interactions, through some cutscenes. There's a couple of flashbacks that will show you like what happened before the events of the game that kind of fill in some information for you, but it's still not like the classic video game cutscene of two characters talking to each other about the story of the game. It's all
yeah.
presented in this much more natural way. And there's like this felt like you said there's no story, and I kind of agree, but I kind of think that like the
Well,
lore
sorry, there
hounds.
is a story. It's just
Yeah,
very it's like the plot points. There's not a lot of plot points in it.
right. It's very simple. Like if you were to lay out the plot of The Last Guardian, it's a pretty simple story of like things that you and Trico do along the way. And then like there's some stuff at the end, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But like there's also I feel like there's a deceptive amount of like background detail and lore here that the game really like it's not going to tell you. And if you want to dig and like really put together the pieces and stuff, I think that like the lore hounds out there could put together a pretty satisfying like backstory
Yeah.
of this world and stuff. It's just like it's not on the plate for you. You got to go digging.
And I don't mind that in this instance. I don't like it when a lot of game stories are buried in that type of thing. When this game story isn't, like the context in which the story happens is buried in like the world building and like how you have to. It's buried in the environmental storytelling, I should say, like where you're supposed to use the context clues of the areas that you explore to figure out, what was the purpose of this room, what was it, who would have been in here, what types of society would have lived in this place, type of thing.
Yeah.
um
And there's
and
like a handful or less of like cutscenes that will fill in very important world building details for you. But even with that, they're not they're not telling you flat out what it is. There's a couple like that, and there's a couple where you're like, what does that even mean, what I'm watching right now? And then like if you sit and think about it and put the pieces together, they do connect together in a really cool and interesting way. And it becomes like a pretty satisfying story at the end of everything, but it's
I
it's
would,
one that
yeah,
you're gonna have to. I mean, like the story of the boy and Trico is on display, and there's no question about what happens in there, and that story is really awesome. But like the details of the world are a little less obvious. But once you put that thought in and connect the pieces together, I think that's actually really cool too.
agreed. Though I'm pretty dense and I don't notice a lot of the environmental storytelling, sadly, unless it's like really just put right there on Front Street for me. But I really enjoyed what I did notice, the very few things I should say that I did notice, if I can even remember them, because it's sometimes I have a hard time with
Yeah.
that. I want to say though something just in kind of going a little bit further into the environmental storytelling. Uh, One of the things I think that Ueda does really well in all of his games is a sense of scale and like size,
Yeah.
because obviously Shadow of the Colossus, it's like when he says you're when that game says you are going to take down Colossus or Colossi, which by the way that game has the best fucking tagline of any game ever. Some mountains are scaled, others are slain. Like
Uh-huh.
that's fucking badass. Like
Yeah,
I'm
that
sorry, that's
is.
like one of the
Yeah.
best. That's one of the best like marketing pitches for a game I've ever heard. Anyway, but in Shadow, when you climb a colossus, it's a fucking colossus. It's huge. It is gigantic. You can see for like miles around because when you get to the top of it. And in Last Guardian, when you're platforming, there's a lot of platforming in this game. And when you're climbing up sides of buildings, like it makes you nervous. It like you are what like there's a couple sections specifically where you're like platforming on like these hanging like almost they're not dream catchers, but it kind of reminds me of that a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Um, but you're hanging on these like giant stained glass like things that are meant to actually intimidate Trico. You don't exactly know why. You could tell it was probably some type of training tool that was used to like corral him or corral other, as you find out later, some other, maybe there's other Tricos. I don't know. Um, but as a way to use to corral them, it like it instills fear in them, and so there's lots of portions of the game where you have to break them or shatter them.
Yeah.
And there's a specific section where there's like a bunch of them hanging, or like a bunch of different parts of it hanging in the air precariously from like strings and like chains, and you have to platform across it, and there is nothing between you and the ground there. Like it is like a five, it's probably a couple 1,000 foot drop.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing between you and the ground except the clouds because you're so high up off the
Yeah.
ground, you know? Um, I think this is a great thing to point out, and that if someone had played Shadow of the Colossus and Eco, both of those games have this impossibly large scale as well.
Mm-hmm.
But The Last Guardian is bigger. Like this place that you're exploring, these ruins, we'll say, you can tell like this was not made for me. This is not, made for humans. Like all the hallways they're Trico sized,
Yep.
so you go through this place and you're just constantly thinking like, what was life like here? Because it's obviously not made for humans. Things are not human sized in here. It's much, much bigger. So they sell that, and then like being in that place just adds to like this sense of awe as you play, just going through these environments. And I think this, like the visuals of this game, if you're into resolution and like fidelity of textures and stuff, this game is like kind of not all, it's like
No,
halfway between
it's kind of
PS3
like
and PS4, you know.
it's kind of cell shaded ish a little bit, like especially
Yeah.
with the boy character. He's a little cell shaded, and there's a lot of like I don't know if dithering is the right term for like on Trico's feathers and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of like it get grainy at times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So it's not like, the most impressively photorealistic game ever, but they they obviously don't care about that, and I don't care either, because like the art design of these spaces, and like these, you walk out into an opening, you see how large this area is, and then you go inside and you're in this impossibly large room, and you're like, what is this even made for? Like it just inspires this awe again as you go through it. It's so cool, and like the architecture and like the carvings in the stone and all of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff is so like, it's so creative, and it just instills this feeling of like strangeness, but also wonder as you go through. Like this is something that's like consistent through all three of this, again, this loose trilogy, that you don't have people talking to you as you're walking through rooms, so you're left to just kind of like take in these details.
And it like the all of his games are very isolationist in a good
Yeah.
way, where
Hmm.
like they isolate you to force you out of your comfort zone and to really like I wonder if that isolationism is purposeful, not just from a storytelling aspect but from a world building aspect, because
Yeah.
by forcing you out of your comfort zone, right? You're not in a place that you've ever seen before or anything that looks even remotely like human in a sense. I shouldn't say it's not remotely human. It's very human in terms of the architecture, but like it, earthly, I guess is a better way to put it. It's like human architecture in an unearthly place. And by doing that, by taking you out of your comfort zone to some place that you've never seen the likes of which on Earth, or at least in your everyday life, it's forcing you to be more alert, to pay attention to your surroundings, because you kind of have to. You can't, like, if if you're playing, like a game where you're like an FPS or something, where you're running down a hallway in a building, you're not really paying attention, because I've seen 1,000 hallways in buildings, or I've seen, thousands of
Yeah.
locker rooms, or, not, maybe not thousands of locker rooms, but you know what I'm saying.
Locker rooms.
I know, right? What have you been doing, Josh? um, but when you put the players in a space that is not foreign and is more comfortable, I feel like it's easier to hide a lot of the details. You don't have to put in as many details, because players may not feel the need to poke around the corners. In Last Guardian, as well as Ueda's other games, all of this is foreign and alien to you, so you almost feel like you need to poke around the corners. And then the gameplay necessitates it too, in order to figure out where to go next. But like, you almost are compelled to, because you don't know what this place is, so you want to poke around and explore, so you understand more of like what you're dealing with here.
Yeah, it's also interesting you mentioned like how lonely the game can be sometimes, that kind of isolationist vibe to all these games. You always have a partner though. It's,
Mm-hmm.
Eco and the princess, and then Wander and Argo, and then now the boy and Trico. But your partner is never like you in a way. They're always different. There's always a communication barrier of some kind, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you are a little bit, if something were to come up where like the boy wanted to talk to somebody, he can't really do that, because you have an animal as your partner in here. It's just interesting how like you are never like technically alone, but you kind of are in these games.
You have no one that you can communicate with through your language, at the
Right.
very least.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned aggro as well. The inspiration for the relationship, or for this game specifically, was the players' relationships with aggro.
Right.
Apparently, Ueda thought that the main relationships in Shadow Colossus were going to be between the character and the girl that you're rescuing, the girl that you're trying to slay all the colossi for.
Right.
But every player felt more connected to aggro, and he thought that was really interesting. And it makes sense. You spend more time with aggro than you do with the girl who's like catatonic on a
Yeah.
fucking like stone slab for the whole game. uh you spend more time with aggro, and he thought that was interesting. So he was like, well, how can I turn that, like that relationship specifically, into a game? And that's
Yeah.
how The Last Guardian was born. And
Hmm.
they started working on it, you know a long ass time ago. There was 11 years in between Shadow of the Colossus and The Last Guardian, and there was so many different, like, one of the main reasons that it took so long was the AI for Trico,
Yeah.
which, it doesn't surprise me. We'll get into that a little bit, because Trico's AI is the most bizarre combination of, I think it's excellent for what it's trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, you let me know when you're ready to get into it, because I got thoughts.
No, I believe it. I believe it. I mean, is there anything else I want to talk about in the world specifically beforehand? I think the only other point I wanted to bring up about the world building and kind of like the visuals, I guess, because it's kind of all tied together.
Hmm.
Um, I think Ueda does a masterful job of finding of being able to use like dark, boring colors and not make them boring. Like,
Yeah.
if you think about like games that were coming out, it's honestly in between Shadow of the Colossus and this, where
The
every
piss
single
filter generation.
the piss filter generation, right? It goes to show what good art direction can do when it's using similar colors with as the piss filter generation, right?
Yeah.
Where everything had, everything was these shades of brown and yellow and like gray and black, and like it was all very gritty and dark, because that's what everybody wanted. They wanted to be Call of Duty and military and, Gears of War and, shit like that. Um, and this has a similar color palette to an extent, but it's used so much more smartly and so much more interestingly. Like, yes, there's lots of stone ruins that you're going to be going through that are brown and yellow because of, like, the color of the fire and whatnot, the torches, and the way it's like reflecting off everything. But it never feels like you're in this, like, how can I put this? It never feels like you're in this grim, dark place. Sort of, it feels like it's in a sad place because of what it used to be, or maybe
Yeah.
what its purpose is for. But it never feels like we're trying to make this gritty and edgy, man. It just
No.
feels like they're trying to build a world that feels lived in, and I would say they succeed in that extremely well.
Yeah, I mean it's old, it's abandoned, and it has the color palette of abandoned ruins, but like you also have clear blue skies and the sunshine and stuff. So like it's not a piss filter game. It's just got a muted color palette in the environments that you're in. But there is, like there is natural beauty too. Like there's lots of parts where you'll see trees and stuff like that
Hmm.
as well. But that stuff is juxtaposed with these neons that are prevalent throughout the game too, that represent these not that stone ruins are natural, but like these very unnatural uh, technologies, we'll say.
Hmm.
These neon bright neon blue goo in the barrels that Trico eats, and the purples in some of the contraptions around, and the stained glass eyes that Trico's afraid of. Those are super super colorful, and they stand out. They stick out like a sore thumb among those stone ruins and stuff like that. And the nature, of course, around in the crater, they call it the nest, so in the nest
Hmm.
as well. So that's a really smart choice, because you have this long abandoned society, but there's some like high technology happening in here too. And the difference in the visual presentation of those is pretty striking.
I also think what they do well with but like besides just the fact that they actually expand the color palette outside the piss filter, like like you're talking, everything you said is spot on, especially with like the barrels, and like there's so many beautiful elements to it. Like it's very haunting at times with some of those like bright kind
Yeah,
of neon things.
I mean, like Trico's eyes, like when
Yeah,
Trico's eyes light up with those neon colors, you're like, oh man, what is going on there?
or even when they don't, he has, just because he's got like cat-like eyes, so when light
Yeah.
shines on them and you can't see his pupils and it's just
Hmm.
like this white, it's unsettling, but in like kind of a way that you kind of seen before, like deer in headlights type of thing. um One thing I was going to bring up too with the way they design all the architecture is that I'm amazed at how well they are able to broadcast to the player things that are climbable and things that aren't, because in games like Uncharted, I'm not trying to throw shade at Uncharted. I love Uncharted, but a lot of games, and Uncharted kind of started this trend, is that the platforms that the ledges you're able to grab on and the platforms you can jump on conveniently have like yellow paint or white paint or something to like visually indicate, hey, this is a grabbable object or a grabbable area. Um, and in this, they don't do that. They just kind of increase the contrast of those spots just slightly more than things that you couldn't really jump on, or they just make a lot of almost every ledge that you're able to reach like climbable. It's just that how useful is that going to be to you if there's nothing up there, type of thing.
Right.
It's really smartly designed in terms of in terms of their like level structure and level layout, just because they are able to guide your eye so well to so many different places. There are some drawbacks to by not having things clearly marked. There's a couple spots where it's like, oh, how the hell was I supposed to figure that out? So I'm thinking specifically in like the water sections where Trico has to dive. And
Yeah.
that was not very fun for me. I didn't really enjoy that because there is no indication that Trico can dive or go underwater. Like you see him jump in water and swim, and maybe you've seen him dive underneath, but you never would think like, okay, how, like, based off how long I can hold my breath, I don't think I'd be able to like why would I go onto Trico's back? Who knows how long he'll stay under? Like there's that part was the only part that kind of frustrated me. But I'm
Yeah.
just impressed by how they're able to lay things out in a way that they don't mark it in the way that you would see other games of this same era. They don't mark their platforming the same way other games of the same era that this game came out did. The Uncharted's,
Yeah.
Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, shit like that. Like the way they would mark their platforming was so much clear and more clear cut than Last Guardian, but Last Guardian, it kind of works.
Yeah, I think like there's a visual language to what you can interact with in The Last Guardian. So, like, a ledge that you can climb on, that you're supposed to be climbing on, looks different from something that you can't interact with. And once you do it a few times, because the other kind of thing that helps you out is that you can, like, when you get into a room, the rooms may look like there's a lot of possibilities for like where you can go and what you can climb and where you're supposed to go, or like an outdoor section or something. But there's really not. Like, it's pretty clear like where you're supposed to be going when you go into a new area. So like once you kind of follow like that looks like the place I'm supposed to go, or like maybe Trico's sniffing around at something, I should go investigate that or something like that. And once you play for a little while, you'll be like, okay, I can climb that ledge. I can balance on this thing. I can hang from this thing. You figure out what you can interact with pretty well. And there's really not that many times where I was like stumped as to what I was supposed to do, until there are some actual like puzzles in the Last Guardian that,
Mm-hmm.
especially later in the game, I was like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing here, because they're introducing like brand new things that that I didn't have to do before. But we'll get there perhaps. It's very minor in the grand scheme of things, but I agree with you. The visual language is pretty easy to read, and without the yellow paint. And it's no shade to the yellow paint, because some games it is the right call to have the yellow paint.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in The Last Guardian they pulled it off without it.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really well done, and we've touched on it a whole bunch of them. Where I think it's a good time to move into this as like kind of the primary core of the gameplay. It's Trico, the
Yes.
giant animal that helps you traverse and kind of helps you figure out the visual language of this game world and how to traverse around it and climb around it. Trico is interesting because when the game had its working title back in 2012, the original name of it was Hitokui no Uwashi Toriko. I'm sorry if I completely butchered that, but it translates to the giant man-eating eagle Toriko.
Hmm.
And Trico, what I love about its name,
Yeah.
is that it has like three different meanings. It can mean prisoner, which is Toriko, which but spelled in like kanji as opposed to katakana, which is how it's spelled in the game. Then it can also mean baby bird, which would be like, what is it? I looked it up. It's tori no ko, and it's also a portmanteau of bird and cat in Japanese.
Right.
Tori is bird and neko is cat. So toriko
Yeah.
is a cat bird. And Toriko has characteristics and behaviors of all those types of animals. Like it's a bird because it's got wings and feathers, but it behaves kind of like a cat, but also kind of like a dog.
Hmm.
One of the things that I found a interview of Ueda talking about Trico's movement and mannerisms, and he explained how he recalled that he took care to not look at just dogs and cats in his childhood, but a variety of other animals, including monkeys and ducks, to give him a sense of the motions for a variety of animals, which he later incorporated into Trico.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that Trico's movements and like grace most align with cats, but it
Mm-hmm.
also has
Mm-hmm.
feathers. And you mentioned like it feels like every feather is independently animated, which is crazy. It also has wings, and the baby bird possible meaning of the word trico. Its wings are not fully developed, so it can't fly. So that's a thing that you work through in the story, is this kind of development process. And then as far as its behaviors remind me the most of dogs. So it really is an astoundingly like creative creature, taking in all of these other things, because there is a kind of like there's a dog like kind of like playfulness and intelligence to Trico, but
Mm-hmm.
there is cat like grace in the way that it jumps, and sometimes the way that it lands. Sometimes it's quite clumsy. I feel like every time you like jump when you're on Trico's back and you jump to a ledge or something. Trico has to scramble up like they like they mocapped cats scrambling up onto a bookshelf like
Yeah.
hundreds of times for all these animations. And then you have these bird like qualities as well. And then it has these horns on its head, and like you said, it has the cat like eyes that give that creepy reflection in the light. um there's a lot going on with Trico, and it could shoot lightning out of its tail. Let's not forget that as a thing about what Trico can do. So it's just it's a wonderful creature. And I think that like one of the best things about this game is that we've talked about, its animations, and the body language is fantastic too. Like if you know anything about dog or cat body language, you will recognize things that Trico does, like the position of its ears, or its posture or something, are all communicating feelings to you the same way that your pets do if you have
Hmm.
pets. Um, and so the big thing about The Last Guardian, we talk about the story and we talk about the gameplay and stuff too, but they have created the single most lifelike animal in any game that I've ever played. And there are so many games that have animals in it, and none of them feel like real animals except for Trico.
That's so right, dude. Like it Trico feels like a living, breathing thing, and it translates that not just in terms of its mannerisms and how it behaves when it like jumps or sniffs things out or gets excited or gets angry or anything like that, but also in the way that you kind of play through the game. There's a
Yeah.
portion in the game later on where, as your relationship with Trico builds, you can actually direct Trico to do different things. You can direct it to jump or stomp or move in a specific direction or something like that. Early on, you do get this ability where you get this shield that wherever you reflect the light off of it to whatever, Tariko's tail will shoot at it. But that, you get a sense of it pretty early on. He's not controlling that.
Yeah,
It
and
just
he's
does it.
scared by it. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't realize that he can do it. And well, he does, but it's like he can't control it, which is such a like that gives me so many questions on like, is that like a machine installed in his tail? Like what is going on? Like why can't he control
Yeah.
that? It's
There's
really
there's
interesting.
there's weird magic going on in this game for sure. And
But
there's a bit of that in in all of these
mhm.
Ueda games. There's always this very strange, very mystical magic going on that it's never fully explained how it works, but you need it. So you figure out how to use it. So same
it
here.
it's kind of funny though. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Every single one of his games, since mystery is such a huge part of the world building for you. Like I love that he uses mystery. So he uses mystery so effectively in his games. Like
Yeah.
the concept and the aspect of game being mysterious. Like a lot of times in games, you'll have this mysterious world, and then they'll explain everything to you about the world. Ueda doesn't do that. He lets you kind of live and breathe in the world and kind of figure it out as you go. And it honestly kind of reminds me. Even though these games are not religious in any way, well, maybe they are in some aspects that I'm unaware of, but at least Christian religious, I should say. It reminds me of, you ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe or any of the Narnia books?
I have not.
So one of they are a very heavy-handed Christian allegory. I'm not going to
Yeah,
go into all
yeah.
the different ways, but basically in the first, basically there's a they keep referencing this stuff called the deep magic before the dawn of time, and they don't really tell you exactly what that is, even though that's essentially just God. Like it's just the concept of God and fate or whatever. And there's a point in the first book where like there's a deeper magic, even deeper than before the dawn of time. Like it it's written much more better than much more. C.S. Lewis wrote it a lot better than I described it there, obviously, but that whole idea of never really truly explaining what the deep magic before the dawn of at the dawn of time is in those books kind of reminds me of the same vibe of like what Ueda does in these games, where it's this you see this world and there's a deep magic in it, but you don't really understand it. You don't understand
Yeah.
where it came from, how it got here entirely. You can see he reveals some things to you through the world building, and especially as we've seen with Trico, whether it's his tail that could just shoot lightning, or there's sections of the games where you'll walk into like this cage type of thing, and this pulsing thing emanates from like this crystal in a cage in the back of it, and it sends Trico into a frenzy, and he
Yeah.
starts trying to attack you, and you're like, holy shit, what's going on?
Yeah, so that like mystery of, this magic extends to Trico and this world building because like we said, this structure that you're in is very clearly made with Tricos in mind in some ways, but you don't know why. You don't know what their purpose is here. And, like you said, there are these contraptions that affect Trico in a lot of different ways, and they seem purpose built to do this to Tricos, especially because they don't affect you in that same way. So there is that mystery here, and it just lends to like this, this feeling that you are working with an animal, but it's not just like a regular animal. This is a fantastical creature that you're befriending and moving through this place with, and that kind of like growing relationship, like you said, it starts out very simple where like you can cause this tail lightning thing by reflecting light with this shield, and you also just have like a very basic at the beginning of the game, like a shout to try to get Trico's attention, and then like if it sees what you're gesturing at or whatever, it will go like, sometimes it will go do the thing that you're supposed to do in the video game to get to the next place. And then like as the game goes on, you can do more fine control of what you want Trico to do and where you want Trico to go and stuff like that. And so it reflects that growing relationship in the gameplay as you go.
Hmm.
And I wanted to get your take on this since we're talking about Trico and now we're talking about like the ways you interact with it. I think this is one of the biggest divisive things about this game is because like you, the boy, cannot do much of anything by yourself. And so the way you solve puzzles, the way you get through combat encounters, the way you do almost anything in this game is with the help of Trico. But first you have to get Trico to like figure out what you want it to do. And
Hmm.
that's not a snappy process. Sometimes you'll press the Trico do something button and Trico just won't do anything, or it'll get distracted by something in the environment or something like that. And this is something that like this is the most common criticism other than like controls and like kind of the game feel, we'll say. Like none of these games are snappy controls.
No.
None of them feel great to do platforming in, etc. But the thing that I see the most criticism about The Last Guardian is that it's kind of hard to get Trico to do stuff sometimes. And before I give my take, I want to hear your take.
So I'm of the opinion that it like how can I put this? Uh this got me thinking for a while. I before I got rid of Twitter, maybe I posted it on Blue Sky, I don't remember, of like a game respecting players' time. I think you even commented on it as well, like, save put a pin in this thought for the episode type of thing. Um one of the things I was thinking about is like how I have a couple different thoughts on this. So let me at least start with the thing that I usually always complain about. I can't stand when a game does not respect a player's time and forces you to do things that you've already proven you can do and blah blah blah. I've argued that take a shot, put up your still loading bingo, whatever it is. Respecting a player's time is always like something I harp on. With that said, I think this game actually does respect your time by not in a weird way, because
Go
the
on.
what this game does is that Trico won't always listen to what you say, and because he's an animal, it's an animal. He, she, it's an animal. it will not listen to what you want to say immediately, especially in the beginning as your level of trust is building. And I genuinely think that Ueda and his team did such a phenomenal job of fine tuning how often and how well Trico listens to you, because I never once felt like it was a drag. Like maybe a couple times where I'm like, get over here, you son of a bitch. But by and large, I can count on one hand how I think it happened maybe twice or three times out of what was it, like a 13-hour playthrough. And that's maybe a total of like 5-10 minutes in the entire playthrough where I was like getting impatient with Tariko. Maybe that's just me, that's just my perception of it. But I I don't mind it so much that Trico was slow and it would take a little while, because it actually was in service to the story and the themes. You know, I think one of the reasons I get so worked up on games like Dark Souls and other stuff is that the shit like that, where it's like, oh, you can't pause, it's building world immersion and all this other shit. And I think that's just a bullshit answer, in my opinion. Like, if you don't want to do a pausing feature because of like the online elements, that's fine, but don't tell me it builds world immersion when you have a fucking menu popping up in front of you anyway. Like, it doesn't. But with this, like the menu and kind of like the campfire system in Dark Souls, right? What does that how does that serve how does that serve its narrative? Maybe you know better than I would, Dave. Do you feel like that those aspects, those mechanics tie into the narrative and the themes of the game at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. They do,
Does
but
it?
it's not apparent to someone who's like just starting. And it even more so ties into the like
The
the
lore?
design of the challenges that you're going through level to level. But don't get me started talking about Dark Souls
No, I
here.
know it's one of your
I
favorites. I
We
know it's one of
will
your
be here
favorites.
for another 2 hours on top of the time we're talking about the Last Guardian. So I agree with you about the Last Guardian because like, is it frustrating when you need Trico to run over there and like knock something down so you can climb up onto a ledge and he like won't do it? Is that frustrating? Yeah, of course it's frustrating. Like, you want to move on. Like, you have this thing, right? Like, in puzzle games especially, and these are a lot of these are puzzles. They're kind of navigation puzzles, or like figuring out, yeah, navigation, like how do I get up to that switch to unlock this door, etc. In puzzle games, it's bad when you have a disconnect between when your brain figures it out and when you can actually do it in the game. All that time between I know what to do and I'm something's keeping me from doing it feels rough. And so like it does feel rough in The Last Guardian when that happens. But as you said, and you're exactly right, it is 100% in service of the story, which is the fact that you, a boy, are working with a fantastical creature who doesn't speak your language and has probably never worked with a human in the same way that it's doing right now. So, if you gesture at something and Trico just kind of like stares blankly back at you, that's realistic. Like, for anyone out there who has dogs, like, how often does your dog just give you a blank
All
look
the
when you tell it to
goddamn
do
time.
something? Like, yeah, like I just the other day it was raining outside. It's like, in the afternoon it's raining, my dog's outside and I'm like, I'm at the door, I'm like, come inside, it's raining, and he's just like staring at me. And I, it reminded me of Trico because I knew I was going to be recording this soon, so I got The Last Guardian on the brain. But like, animals are not perfect command executing machines. They're
Hmm.
living things with their own thought processes, and they don't speak English. So like, you give them the command to do something and sometimes they're like, what do you want?
Hmm.
And you get that feeling from Trico. And so like, it transcends being frustrating, and in my opinion it's magic because you do feel it. And this might just be like selective memory, but I do feel like it gets easier as you go through the game and as the boy and Trico get closer. And you do, again, you have more
That's
fine
not selective
control.
memory. It absolutely gets easier because you get more ability. Like
Yeah,
they expand the range of things you're able to do with Trico.
right.
Initially, like you said, you can just call him over, but at a certain point in the game, you can direct Trico into specific
Yeah.
places and locations and whatnot.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, this is as resonant as like gameplay and storytelling could ever be. You're telling a story about a growing relationship between two unlike creatures, basically. And then the gameplay is reinforcing that. We're like, yeah, at the beginning of the game, it's kind of hard to get Trico to do what you want because it doesn't understand you. You don't understand it. You're just trying to, like, give commands. And it kind of feels like a happy accident sometimes when Trico does what you want early in the game. And then, like, you're a great pair at a certain point in the game. Like,
Hmm.
you really feel like partners. And this for me personally, because I mean, I love my dog, and I've had pets my whole life, and the relationship between human and animal can be this magical loving relationship. And like, maybe we'll talk about some specifics in the spoiler section, but the story hammers on some of those points as well too. Like the story cutscenes where you watch what
Mm.
happens hammer on that too. But the gameplay is really, really magical at giving you the feeling that you're interacting with this kind of alien creature. And so, in my opinion, it would be ridiculous to want Trico to be this perfect machine. That would, it would, the whole thing would shatter if that was the case. And um you're right, like there has to be this insane amount of like, how do you design the AI
Fine
to only
tuning.
listen to you sometimes, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's a
tricky.
magical, it's a tricky line they walked, but I think they did it perfectly. And if that's the reason this game took 11 years to come out or whatever, like, it was worth it because what
Well,
we got is awesome.
and think about this too. Like as much as I was shitting all over Dark Souls and stuff like that, like it,
It's me. I bring it out of you.
I know I bring it up a lot. I just think I have a weird like hipster mentality with it where it's like everyone talks about how great the game is, and then I tried it. I'm like, it just didn't click with me. So I have this weird thing where I just get mad every time. I'm like, why don't I like it? I want to like it. God damn it! Why don't I like it? But like to bring it actually back to Shadow, like um it, it the fine tuning, and honestly, obviously Dark Souls must be doing something right because that's why so many people like it. But the fine tuning and like how and when to respect a player's time, I think is something that like I'm actively learning as I'm playing more games for the podcast and stuff like that. Where, if you would have talked to me last year or a couple of years ago, I'd have been like, no, no, no. Games need to respect a player's time. We're adults now. We don't got time for this bullshit. Just let us play games type of thing. And now I'm more switching to the opinion of like, well, like you have to know when to do it. When is a good time to give players kind of something that's a little bit bullshit, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
whether even in this game where like there's a lot of backtracking, you'll get really far and then something will happen and you'll have to go all the way back to where you started. And now there's a faster way to get out of there because you have more abilities. The landscape has changed because you've fallen through ceilings and stuff. But like you will go, like there's a section in the game where you literally go back to the cave you started in,
Yeah.
and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, I did all this for nothing. But
Yeah.
that's a little frustrating. But I think one of the most interesting things about Last Guardian um, is what we've been touching on with the AI. Because if you think about it, when game developers make AI, the computer already knows every action that you are doing, and they have to program the computer to pretend that it doesn't know. And
Yeah.
now on top of that, you have another level of obfuscation of the computer knows everything you're doing. You're telling Trico to do this. The computer has to pretend that it doesn't know what you're doing and make Trico also know what you're doing, but pretend like it's not going to listen. Like it's this weird, like whisper down the lane of having to like put your mind around something. And like it just, I'm just very impressed with Trico because it's so finely balanced And I understand it may not be for everyone's cup of tea. I think if you go into this game knowing it's going to be a slow paced puzzle game with a little bit of action, it is a lot more palatable than like
Yeah.
Shadow of the Colossus, which while Shadow of the Colossus I wouldn't say is fast paced. Like when you're fighting, you're fighting. Like it's
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's
that's an
action.
action game. Yeah.
But in between those fights, it's a lot of just riding a horse and that the very kind of like isolationist type of thing of just those big sweeping vistas and landscapes.
Yeah. Well,
And
you
in
need
this,
you need time in Shadow of the Colossus to think about what you've just done. So hence the long horse rides.
hmm and
Um
it with Last Guardian, it really is impressive how they do it, and I think this is a game that really kind of started my shift of like being okay with games respecting a player's time. Now, it also, or sorry, games selectively choosing when to respect a player's time and when not to, for in an effort to for the themes of the game or the story or for the
yeah,
overall aesthetic. And I don't know, I don't think you would have listened to it yet, Dave. But did you listen to my episode with Jesper Jewell on the Commodore 64?
not yet. No.
So there's a portion in his book that I read that really resonated with me. And listeners, you'll know this is like how I really enjoyed his book because I'm bringing it up outside the episode too. Um, where he talks about difficulty being an aesthetic choice, and I never really thought of difficulty that way. Where in reference to the Commodore 64, he's talking about it in the chapter where basically he's looking at 5 different ways people use the Commodore 64. In the last section, it was the Commodore 64 as an aesthetic, as like kind of like what we look at like NES stuff now, right? Where people, when if you look at like Shovel Knight, that's an 8-bit looking game. It's in the style of a Nintendo game, right? It has a lot of modern trappings, but it's the artwork and the vibe of it is like this is old school NES but updated a little bit, right? Um, and that's kind of like that purpose of the Commodore 64. Same thing, like how can they take the Commodore 64 and use its limitations as an aesthetic for your art now, type of thing. And that's where he kind of goes into difficulty being an aesthetic. Like, what do you choose to make difficult, to for like which aspects are you choosing to purposely make difficult when you don't need to be? And he referenced that specifically in that chapter, when there are people who write programs and write games and write music for the Commodore 64 today. They will actually write all that stuff on modern computers because it's faster to do it, but they will write it with the limitations of the Commodore 64 in mind. So when they port it over to it and actually run it on original Commodore 64 hardware, it will still work. So that's what he means by difficulty is an aesthetic. They are choosing to use the limitations of the Commodore 64 on a modern system, and translating that over to video games and video game design. Then when you have something, how do you choose what to make difficult and what to not to make difficult? And you always want to challenge in a game, but I just never really thought of like the difficulty as an aesthetic. I always just thought of it as like this is a part of a mechanic, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
but never as an aesthetic. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it. And Last Guardian really ties in well with that idea, where the difficulty in this game is part of the overall aesthetic and theme of it,
Yeah, the difficulty of getting an animal to do what you want it to do. Yeah. It's interesting, like, and you've brought this up a couple times, but I did a podcast on my show, a discussion episode about if video games need to be fun.
I bring this
And
up all the time. I even think I brought it up on the Commodore 64 episode.
okay,
I
so
might have. I don't remember now.
we had that conversation on my show, and I think The Last Guardian may have even come up in that discussion because of how frustrating it can be sometimes to know the answer to a puzzle and you just can't get Trico to fucking walk across the room and do it. And how these moments have value, and how games don't have to be fun. uh you can have moments in games that are not fun. You can have moments that are tedious. You can have moments that are challenging or even kind of like rude to the players. You can have entire games like that if you want to. I mean, games are they are so far evolved past the point of needing to be fun so that you'll put quarters into an arcade machine
Hmm.
that we can accept, we should be able to accept that a game can challenge you as a person the same way that a movie can challenge you or a book can challenge you. And The Last Guardian is full of challenging moments like that. Now, when we talk about respecting time, I don't think The Last Guardian really disrespects your time that much because, as you said, it's a momentary frustration. It's not like you're going to be in this room for an hour trying to get Trico to do
Yeah.
it. So, in a way, Trico is much more responsive than my dog is.
Yeah.
But it's you will have those moments, and I understand the feeling of frustration, but I don't understand that as a criticism of The Last Guardian as a work of art, because that is Trico. That's an animal you're dealing with. It's going to figure it out eventually. It always does. But you might have a few moments where it's just kind of staring back at you. And there's a bunch of, I mean, I'm glad you actually, now that you brought up Dark Souls, the one of the reasons Dark Souls and Demon Souls hit it so big is because games didn't challenge you in the
Yep.
late in
Hmm.
2009 and in 2011. Games wanted you to see the entire thing and stick around for the multiplayer and all that stuff. And then in comes these games that make you work for it, and it resonated with a lot of people. So there is a look at that. We tied it all together. And there is great value in a game challenging you a little bit. I just did an episode on my show about a game called Void Stranger that you'll get hours of progress wiped away through one misclick sometimes, and it feels really bad. And that is a blatant disrespect for your time as a player. But I didn't hate that game. There's I'm not going to talk about that game too long here, but there is a value in that decision, and everyone's going to draw the line at like, when does it become too much for me personally and I want to
Hmm.
stop playing this game? So like for some other things, I do get it. For The Last Guardian, I hear that criticism and I don't understand it. It is like if you drop off of The Last Guardian because Trico is too hard to work with, then I just think that you weren't going to connect with it anyway. Like it's part of the process. If you watch a movie, Life of Pi, or you read the book Life of Pi, the boy and the tiger are not friends at the beginning of that. So there's a process in all of these stories like this. And I have not read or watched Life of Pi, so I'm going to stop talking about that because I don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm pretty, like I saw in the trailer, the tiger roars at the boy at some point at the beginning. So not friends. That's not a friendly move. And I've been talking for a long time, but like this is something I feel very strongly about, and I was very happy that you wanted me to come on and talk about The Last Guardian because it really this is a perfect game to illustrate the point that video games have so much more to offer than ear to ear grinning fun all the time. And it's okay if a game challenges you. It's okay if the game is not responding to you right away. And it's okay if a game is frustrating sometimes, if it's for a point to reinforce something about the story they're trying to tell or the feeling, the emotion they're trying to elicit in you as the player. It's okay. And I think that a lot of people are on board with that. And I think that like one of the great things that some video games out there have done is to illustrate that it is okay. It is okay to push you and kind of like stare you in the eyes and ask you like, are you in it? Are you in this? And I think The Last Guardian is really good for that.
It also serves the purpose not just of the characters but also of the narrative. Like
Yeah.
the ending of this game doesn't mean anything if you don't have the 12 hours of the relationship building with Trico. Like
Yeah.
it would mean nothing to you. Like that's one of the things that, like, people always talk about with games, where like why games are such a deeply personal experience. Like, look no further. Like years ago, I interviewed the voice actress Cissy Jones, and she talked about how like she's done voiceover work for anime, for like American cartoons, for movies, that stuff, and she's obviously done voiceover work for video games. She was Delilah in Firewatch, if you've played Firewatch.
Yeah.
um Firewatch was the first time she ever got death threats, because, not saying that makes it okay, but if for those who played Firewatch, Delilah is a polarizing character for a good reason, and I'm not going to spoil as to why or anything like that, but because I think you all should play it. I should actually cover that on the show. I really love that game, but like, she got death threats for that, and she never got that from like other stuff where she played like a villain or something like that. Not saying Delilah is a villain, she actually isn't, but neither here nor there. It's She never got that, and it's because people have, like, you spend hours with someone, and that was only like a that
It's
Firewatch
a
is a
short
short
game.
game. It's
Yeah.
like 2 to 3 hours. Like, you could beat that in a sitting. And with with Last Guardian, you're spending 13 hours approximately
Yeah.
with Trico. So when the ending of that game happens, like, I got emotional. Like, I got really emotional at the end of this game
Oh,
because of
dude.
how it ends.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and not to say, because I won't spoil it unless if we're
You know
keeping to
what?
no spoilers right now.
Let's we can get into the spoiler wall territory here, just because I think we've kind of come naturally to it. For those who don't want spoilers for this, so, I don't do a hard spoiler wall like you do, Dave. So I just kind of shout it out in the episode. I also don't want to steal your format. But
Because I invented it, of course.
Well, no, but the way you kind of handle the spoiler wall, I don't always. If I use it, I actually make sure to shout you out in the episode that I'm taking a page out of your book. But so for those who have not played this game and they want to know more about the story, or if you don't care, that's cool. But like, I highly recommend going to play it and like experiencing it. I don't think, even with that said, I don't think the plot twist will ruin your experience. Like, knowing the plot twist and knowing like the story at the end of it, I don't think will ruin it.
Yeah.
But because really where the emotional gut punch comes from is that amount of time you spend with Toriko. Like we're saying, if you saw this story straight through in like a straight through cutscene, you might get some emotions out of it, but you're not going to feel the same way that you would unless you spent 10, 11, 12 hours with this
Yeah.
dog, cat, bird thing,
Agreed.
So the ending made me cry. So Dave, feel free to talk about this, man. You were saying like it also hit you in the feels.
Yeah. So, well, there's a couple things. So like you said, you spend so much time with Trico, and you go through so many of these situations with Trico, and then at certain points in the story, things will happen that kind of like turn Trico against you. There's the
Mm-hmm.
first time you go in one of those mind control cages, and Trico actually eats you during
Yeah.
that. And so like you you get the sense like that it's not necessarily Trico's fault. There's some kind of mind control going on, but like you're reminded of the danger of this animal. They called it before you started playing, before you became friends with Trico. They called it a man-eating beast, and you can see why. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's that revelation in the middle of the game. And I actually think it's when Trico eats you and you're inside of Trico. Maybe I'm mixing things up, but I think this is when they pull away to that kind of origin story cutscene that shows Trico fly into the village, because the game opens with your character in that cave with Trico. You don't know how you got there, and so they go back and they show you this cutscene where Trico comes to your village at night when your character is sleeping, sneaks up to a window, goes inside, eats your character, and then flies back to the nest
Mm-hmm.
and gets hit by lightning and crash lands in there. And you eventually discover like that lightning strike is what allows you to be friends with him, because it breaks this mind control mask that Trico was wearing when it
Mm-hmm.
abducted you. And then you come into contact with other Tricos throughout the game. They're all wearing those masks. So you see that, but like you get that revelation that like I'm here in this fucked up situation because Trico kidnapped me and brought me here.
Yep.
And you know, like the saving thing is that you know that it was not in its of its right mind because it had that mind control mask on.
But you didn't know that just yet, I don't think. Like you didn't like you
Perhaps
realize
not.
like when it happens, he gets struck by lightning and that like breaks everything up. So if that lightning strike hadn't happened, you would be gone because I don't know if you were going to get to it next, but what you
Oh
see
yeah.
at the end of the game of like what Trico was going to do to you
Right.
if he had not been struck by lightning.
Yeah, so there's this whole backstory in the game about this godlike force that is in this tower and in the middle of this nest, and it needs this energy. And so there used to be a system, and this is very lightly explained, but can be inferred in the backstory of it. There used to be a system where the people would sacrifice their um, you know, they're young or they're sick or whoever, maybe they're strongest, I'm not sure. They would sacrifice members of their community to this god in order to, continue living on almost untouched from them. And the result of this sacrifice is that the human bodies are processed and they're separated into this shadow which fills the suits of armor that attack you throughout the game, and then
Mm-hmm.
this pure light energy source, which is that bright blue goo that Trico loves so much. And that goo is also an energy source that like powers the technology around. But the Tricos love it. They love it. They're addicted to it. So this system of sacrifice ended a really long time before the game started, but the machine is still turning because the Tricos love that goo so much. And so they
Mm-hmm.
go out and kidnap people from the surrounding countryside, bring them back to the nest, drop the bodies in the holes, and then they get to eat that sweet goo after it's all processed. And
Yep.
that powers them, that heals them, because like Trico gets hurt throughout the game, you have to feed it barrels of goo to heal it. It's like this magical substance. And so
Mm-hmm.
like it was really cool to me. I love kind of stories like this where you have this like intricate machine of working parts, and like it used to have a greater purpose than it has now, because now it's still self-sustaining in a way, but it's not to a productive end. It's just self-sustaining. It used to power technology and stuff like that until the people got sick of it and they left and they moved out into the countryside. Now it's just kind of like the Tricos get food and the god thing continues to exist, but that's it. There is no other product of this kind of cycle, but it's still this self-sustaining machine that has outlived its usefulness for a really long time, but it's still going, which I think is a cool world building thing that's going on. But all that to say, your character, your boy, was being transported to the nest to be sacrificed for a quick meal for Trico. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you teach a dog to shake and you give it a treat. You teach a Trico to kidnap a boy and sacrifice it and it gets a treat. That's what's going on here. And so finding that out, I don't know. What did you think? Like, because this never made me hate or distrust my Trico, but it made me like sad for the other Tricos that you meet because you know that they're locked in this thing, and underneath that mind control mask there is an intelligent and loving creature under there, and it's being used.
I didn't really like it was weird where when I first saw it, I didn't quite understand the mind control part of it at that moment. Um because I think what it was that no, actually, I'm sorry. Once I understood what it was for, once you find out that it's like I didn't know why Trico kidnapped you at first, right? You don't find out about the whole mind control thing until pretty much the very end of the game, because that when you finally get up to the top of the tower, you see the other Tricos dropping off like they're like basically like owl pelleted humans
Yeah.
into this machine and getting the little barrels. And so that's when you see like, oh shit, that's what it's all coming from. That would have been me if I hadn't. So they don't give you enough time really to think about like the ramifications of your relationship with Trico after finding out this information. But they also immediately right after that show you like, especially when you try to leave, and then the God machine thing basically mind controls all the Trico into a rage to attack you and your Trico, which is just absolutely heartbreaking seeing them like
Oh yeah,
gnaw and like
they gang
they
up on
tear,
Trico and they
yeah,
beat him up like real
they
bad.
tear
Like
his
it's
tail off.
yeah, it's not a close fight. Like, and they're fully developed. There was something about the lightning strike that like
Well, he got
weakened
rid of
your
his wings.
Trico, got rid of its wings. Its horns are very small. Like it's almost like it de-aged it or dematured it
Well,
in a
the
way.
way I thought is that what happened was when your Trico got struck by lightning, it removed its wings and its horns broke off in the fall. So it
Yeah.
because those are such big parts. So like this isn't just like okay, I pulled my hair out, I got to wait for it to grow back type of thing, or I cut my hair, I got to wait for it to grow back. Like this is like body parts and limbs. So it's
Yeah.
going to take a long time for the healing process to come back. And it's funny because I didn't notice at first Tarico's wings getting bigger and his horns slowly coming back. By the end
Yeah.
of the game, it was like I was over 3/4 of the way through the game where I finally went where I finally had the thought, huh, are his horns getting bigger? They look bigger than
Yeah.
I remember.
And there's a couple parts where like Trico tries to fly again, even though his wings
Hmm.
probably aren't ready. And, it ends in spectacular crashes. But you can see Trico like trying to get back to that point. But I think you can figure out the mind control thing before the ending once you see the other Trico that are mind controlled
Well,
and
I
they
just
all
thought
have the masks on.
I thought the masks were just armor. I never leapt to the conclusion that it was mind control. I thought it was just armor.
Gotcha. Because like you can see the broken mask in the room, I think, where you start with your Trico. And
Yep.
it's like the only thing that separates your
Well,
loving, intelligent Trico from all the other ones is yours doesn't have a mask on.
Well, the way I originally thought it was that your Toriko ate you, and when it got struck by lightning, the shadow soldier dudes are like, "Oh, here's a dead one," and then put him in there, and like I guess like chained him up for like I thought it was going to be like some type of sacrifice to something else type of thing. But like but you woke up before that could happen, and so he's no longer a soldier now. His best chance of surviving because he's been discarded by those shadows is with you. So I always just kind of took it as like you two need each other because of that, not because he was mind controlled. And then I obviously realized later what the actual thing was, that it was mind controlled. But I just thought
Hmm.
it was like he was doing this, he was helping you and you were helping each other for survival for both of you, and that he's
Yeah.
just no longer welcome amongst the group that he was a part of.
Well,
Because
I thought,
I never
yeah,
thought that mask was mind control. I thought it was just like he was like an armored Toriko, like he's going to war type of thing.
right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's kind of cool that like the inciting event that kind of starts to break this cycle is a random lightning strike. Like the events of the game wouldn't have happened if not for just the Trico was flying home in a storm and got hit by lightning and it broke the mind control. And then before they were able to, you know, get a new mask on it, you're able to, get out of that starting cave. So, but yeah, back to that fight, that big brawl at the end.
Yeah,
So it's genuinely heartbreaking because um, throughout the game, Trico is your defense. Like your boy, this isn't Eco or Shadow of the Colossus. Like your boy doesn't have a weapon. You can't fight anything. The best you can do is like
shove.
run. Yeah,
You
and
can
push. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
there's a couple
And so
sections where you have to shove shield, like there's this like weird like stained glass icon that Trico is like mortified of,
right.
and there are these shadow soldiers that come up with that emblem on their shield, so you have to sprint at them, push them, and knock the shield out of their hands, so Trico will actually go after them. But sorry,
Yeah.
continue. I just wanted to cover that real quick.
Right. So like in those combat sections where there's a bunch of those shadow enemies, Trico, you have to let Trico kill them. And Trico will fight them. Like he gets enraged at the sight of them. And like another little subtle characterization thing is kind of like the tail lightning. I don't think Trico is fully in control of this
Mm-hmm.
because Trico needs calming down after the fights. Like you can, I think this affects Trico in a way. Like he goes into this rage when these enemies are in the
Yeah.
room, and perhaps that's just Trico's intelligence. That these are the things that stuck me with spears at the beginning of the game, and these are the things that were, helping to carry out this mind control or whatever. Maybe there's an intelligence there too. But anyway, so Trico's your only line of defense throughout the entire game and your offense to beat
Mm-hmm.
enemies. You kind of just like jump on Trico's back and just hold on while he kills everything. And then you get to this brawl at the end, and it's like 20 Tricos versus one. And I mean, it's not. This is not a. This is not an amazing. This is not an anime situation. Trico gets the
No.
shit beaten out of him in that fight. They rip his tail off, and it's all in service of like saving you because all those other Tricos see your character as the means to get a treat, to get a meal. So
Yep.
Trico's defending you, and the way you get through that is they rip its tail off and throw it away, and you have to go pick it up and carry it down to the place where that god sphere thing is, and shoot lightning at it with the tail, and that breaks the entire thing. As soon as that god thing is destroyed, the mind control is snapped. The Trico literally fall limp out of the air, um,
Yeah.
except for yours, and that kind of like breaks it. But you get in that, no one likes to see an animal get hurt, but like these things, like just they're
And the longer
ravaging
that you
Trico.
take to do it, the longer your Trico is screaming.
Yeah,
It's kind of traumatic a little bit.
yeah, it's brutal. Yeah, and then after that, like you're really close to the edge of the crater, the edge of the nest, and Trico is like really badly hurt, but it uses the last of its strength to fly you out and fly you back home. It remembers where your boy came from, even
Yeah.
like these are intelligent creatures. And the part that really got me, like this part that really made me sad and made me cry, was when you get back to the village. It's returning you to the village, and the villagers are attacking, or like they're getting ready to attack it.
Because they know is that these things take our people.
Yeah, these are man-eating creatures, and we don't know, like, you put yourself in their shoes. We don't know why it's bringing this boy back, but it is. We don't trust it though. And so like um the boy's really badly hurt from the events, with the electricity and the destroying the god sphere and stuff like that. Trico's really badly hurt. You kind of got the feeling that it used the last of its strength to get to the village, like it crash lands in like the village lawn or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And you, like, the boy with like the last of his strength tells Trico to leave, to run away, because it's the only way Trico is not going to get killed by these warriors in the village. So Trico takes off, but you're like, he couldn't even land when he got there. Like he literally crashed, and like, like an airplane crash through this thing into the village. Is Trico ever going to get home? It's just kind of like left at that. And it's this really sad, but like kind of beautiful moment of understanding between Trico and the boy, of like,
Yeah.
we can't be together. We'll never see each other again. But like, it's there's a moment of love shared there. It's really beautiful, but it's like really, really sad because you want a happy ending for both of them. together. You want them to be able to live together
Mm-hmm.
after all of this, it's just like the village Trico, because he's cool now. Like, he's not mind controlled. He's chill. He'll protect the village, but like that can't, it's not how it's going to be.
They do give a little post-credit scene that kind of gives you a
Well,
little
yeah,
bit of hope,
yeah,
but it's purposely left ambiguous, and I think that's for the best, because I think if you would have seen a happy endings, and the post-credit scene basically is that it flashes forward to, because the game is being told there is like an omniscient narrator, and it's the boy as an
yeah,
adult, as like an
all
old
grown
man,
up.
all grown up, and you see a flash forward then, or I guess present day of the boy as an adult, as a grown man, and some village kids find the same shield that you use to like get the lightning bolt from Trico's tail, and he shines it, and then like miles and miles away, Trico, like you see this cave, and some Trico eyes pop up. And so you
Yeah,
kind of get the idea that, oh, is that our Trico? Could our Trico still be alive all these
and
all these years
and there's
later?
a baby in there too.
Yep. So did Tarico have kids and whatnot? It's really,
Yeah.
it leaves it at a possibly hopeful ending. At the very least, if it's not our Tarico, is it our Tarico's kids? Or is it just a different breed of Tarico? Who know? Or not breed, but a different Tarico.
Right.
Um, real quick, I just want to comment on that final boss section.
Yeah.
Um, I actually really like the final boss section up until the tail part. Um, I liked going around, kind of like, it looks kind of like a spaceship at the very end. It's all white and
Mm-hmm.
like very light gray, and you run around. You have to basically kill all these. I think it's before you and Tarico get to the top, and Tarico gets the shit beaten out of him. But like you have to dangle Tarico's tail down a precipice, so that way you can then use the shield to like shoot. Basically, you have to basically get these shadow soldiers, give them their heads back so they turn back on, and then to hit the buttons behind them. And if you want to, I mean, technically, you could probably kite them around and hit the buttons, and you'd have like 6 chasing after you, or like 12, and that'd be stupid. But you could do it if you're good enough. But what I would always do is I would just put the helmet on, run back over to Rico's tail, and then blast it with a shield, with a lightning strike from the shield, in the center room. And I thought that was kind of cool. I actually really enjoyed that. But what I didn't like about the ending is, like, after Tarico gets its tail ripped off, eh, I don't I don't think that's intuitive enough to like figure out that you need to pick the tail up to drop down, like find a way to get it to drop down with you, which is fucking annoying as shit in the first place. Because he, like, there's so many times where it would like get caught on stuff, and then my dude would just hang on it, and I would have to find ways to like get back up and pull it off, and it was really annoying. And the other reason I don't like it is, like, I never would have thought of that. I never would have thought to bring the tail down to shoot the guy, because I don't even know how you can get, like, I didn't even understand how you could get back down, or that was an option. It just, I think it led me to another thought where, how much should a puzzle, like in puzzles and games, how much information should they give you versus how much should you figure out? Because sometimes I feel like I give up too easily on puzzles. Like, this isn't me saying like this is necessarily a bad solution to a puzzle or a bad puzzle inherently. I just, for some reason with me, I it just didn't feel like it was something that I would have been able to suss out on my own without looking up. um and part of me wonders, is that me, or is it the game? So like,
No, it's not just you. It's a cool creative solution to a puzzle using a gameplay thing that you haven't done for a very long time. Like,
up
I
until
forgot the
like
tail could
right
shoot
before it.
lightning. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because
Um,
you get the shield in the beginning, and then it goes away. At the first time that Tarico loses his shit in that cage and
yeah.
like eats you, you lose the shield, and the shield is still inside of him
Yeah, until
until
he
later
pukes
on.
it up later, and you just, oh, my shield. Okay. And then you take it back. But yeah, those two puzzles that you mentioned, the one with the hanging tail, and then the one where you have to pick up the severed tail, both of those were less than intuitive to me. Um, the last one more so than the hanging tail one.
Well, the first hanging or the hanging tail one was pretty intuitive to me because they had made you do something like that similarly before. Maybe not with like shooting the bad guys with it, but like there's a couple sections of the game where like specifically there's one in like a mine shaft where you have to get Tariq, like you fall through a hole and you have to like call Tarico over to a specific spot so he'll let his tail down for you to climb up.
Yeah.
That one was like really unintuitive for me, and I couldn't, like, I was searching all over trying to figure out where to go, and I had called Tarico beforehand, and like I couldn't figure out how to get him. Like, I actually went to the spot where you're supposed to and called him, but because he didn't listen, and I waited a little bit, and I would call him a little bit, and he didn't listen. I was like, well, I guess this isn't the right thing. And so I moved on and I couldn't figure it out until I looked it up, and I'm like, okay, so he just wasn't listening to me the first couple times. So now I have to go back and keep doing it until he fucking listens to me. And of course he did
Yeah.
it on the first try that time.
Yeah, it took me a while too to figure that out. And then the last puzzle, I think I had to look up what to do with that severed tail, because it's just like not, you know, it wasn't super like easy to figure out to me that I need to go find the tail. You know, maybe I was just too in the moment, and I'm also the not the brightest puzzle game player. So like I do get kind of stumped by seemingly obvious things sometimes, but
Well, I think the thing that I was trying to like get at is like, I was going to say it's not broadcast well that you're supposed to do anything with the tail, but then the conflicting part of me is like, well, it's a puzzle. It's not supposed to broadcast it to you, otherwise it's not a puzzle. You know,
yeah,
you need to think about it. So that's when I started thinking about like, how much should puzzle games broadcast the puzzle to you? You know, like broadcast the solution, or like how much information should they give you in order to figure out the solution? And you know, like I think I would have been more understandable of it if it wasn't in like such a tense moment in the game where like Chirico's getting ripped limb from limb, and like I'm worried that he's going to lose his feet or his arms, and you're running around panicking trying to figure out what to do. Like, and even like going down to defeating the machine, like I never would have thought of that, because to climb up there you have to go past these like big freaking fans, and to, you know, that are like whirling, and you have to stop them temporarily to get back onto it. And then there is a way to stop them again, like when you're on there. But like for me, I just, for some reason, I'm like, why would I go back down there? Like Tarico's right here. If we can escape, we can escape. Like it did not click with me at all. Like
yeah,
like that would have been a possible solution, because once again, also, why would I assume the tail would work when it's disconnected from Tarico? I would have
yeah.
thought that it's, you know, once it's disconnected from him, then it's disconnected from him,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
apparently not.
it's just not the most intuitive immediately, and maybe it's partly because of the situation where it takes place in. Like, I wasn't mad about it when I read about, the solution. It wasn't one of those where I read the solution, I was like, I would have never figured that out. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not one of those. It was just like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Well, I'll go do it, and I'll go see
It's
the
it's
rest of it.
it's a clever solution, like you said. I don't think I would have figured it out, but at the same time, I feel like they gave you enough information to figure it out. It's just that I don't know if I would have spent the amount of time required to, like, for me to have figured out, which could have been like a couple hours, because I'm
Yeah.
sometimes dense as shit and I don't think of things.
Me too.
So I don't know. It got me thinking about like puzzles and games, and when is like what is an acceptable amount of information to give a player, so that way the puzzle's not just this easy thing, but at the same time it's not too obtuse. And
Yeah.
like I it's something I'm kind of realizing about myself right now, that I'm trying to like really kind of suss out and like figure out what my preference in puzzle games are, because like I like I've noticed, at least for me, like I like being able to figure out a puzzle pretty quickly, and if I don't figure it out after I've exhausted what I consider are all the options, then I just look it up. And sometimes I'll look at the answer and I get mad at myself. I'm like, man, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I just take an extra 5 minutes to try something else? And it just, I don't know. I've been thinking about it more and more, because I feel like I'm bad at getting worse at puzzle games.
Yeah, I definitely understand that feeling. I have that sometimes too. I think this one, if you were to really take stock of like what tools do I have, what, you know, what is the thing that's causing this problem? You'd be like, oh, this is all happening because of that God sphere thing. And what abilities have I been using in this game? Well, Trico's tail can shoot lightning. I just like didn't put together that I could go pick up the severed tail and still make it go shoot lightning. Like I,
Yeah.
I kind of like think if I'm remembering back to when I played it, I think I saw the tail get severed and I was like, oh, his tail's gone. And then, it's like run over and pick up the tail.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, it's still over there. Yeah. Okay. It was just one of those where like, I'm not mad at the solution. I feel like it's using things that you have
But
used
yeah,
and know about. It's just, I didn't put those together myself.
versus there's others, when a puzzle will have like, here, hit this random section of the floor, which to like solve the puzzle, which kind of is like the diving puzzles in the game. um
Yeah. Something that you're not familiar with,
a
that you
mechanic
didn't
you
know
didn't even
was
know
an
you
option.
had. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or it's not like a super Metroid bomb this one specific part of the floor to open up the critical path. Like it's
Dude,
not like
that's
that.
fucking the original Metroid. Super Metroid is so much better laid out than the original Metroid. That's a rant for another day.
Yeah.
um Uh, is there anything else you'd want to touch on? Do you have any thoughts on like the soundtrack at all? I didn't. This soundtrack to me, it didn't. I didn't really notice anything about it. Not saying that it's bad. It's just I think it was designed more with the intention of like fitting the game's atmosphere. It did have some epic moments with it, but I don't really have
Yeah.
any thoughts on the soundtrack. What about you?
Yeah, that's basically how I feel. I mean, you think of the Shadow of the Colossus soundtrack is iconic
Yeah,
because as you
of that
get through the
theme.
different stages of those boss fights, the soundtrack is adaptive and will like underscore like I'm making progress in this because now this big heroic theme started playing and it's like it's catchy. A lot of the songs in Shadow of the Colossus are hooky, even though they're not like pop melodies or something like that, but they're
Yeah,
very catchy, hummable, singable songs. And The Last Guardian is just a very different approach. The Last Guardian soundtrack is beautiful though. Like if you go listen to it, you may not notice the song while you're playing the game. It's really providing great emotion though, during the scenes. And it's beautiful music. It's just a different purpose to the previous game. But if you go listen to it, you may be surprised at how many melodies you remember, and you'll obviously hear the emotion behind the songs. And it is a very beautiful soundtrack. It's just not memorable in the same way that a lot of video game music is, which is not at all a criticism of it as video game music. It's just a different purpose.
exactly, exactly. Um, I don't really have anything else to add to our discussion then, man. I feel like we've covered everything that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about like the puzzles, about, the idea of like how difficulty should work in a game, like the what your relationship with Toriko. Like, uh, the only other things I can think of that we didn't really touch on was there's one moment at the end, towards the end of the game, that like really, besides the ending that got me emotional, was the when you are in a lot of trouble and Toriko overcomes its fears of that stained glass window and bursts through it.
Hmm. Good moment.
Oh
Also,
my
the
god.
time when Trico does fly for the first time,
Yeah.
it's a really wonderful moment. This game is full of little triumphs along the way and little moments where you feel like you understand Trico a little bit better. You can see Trico getting more confident. They really portray not only Trico's emotions through body language, but they also portray kind of what's going on in Trico's head. And like you said, like it's a little bit timid. It's kind of scared of some stuff, or like it's very adversarial with the other Tricos. Like there might be some like territoriality going, um, or just like rivalries, or Trico just recognizes the danger or something like that. maybe it's being protective of you. But like there's all these little things that you get. You really feel like you know this creature. And when you do have those moments, you're like, oh, my buddy, like he can fly, or he overcame his fear of the stained glass windows and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's really beautiful.
So many good moments in this game, man. I think it there's just so much to love about it. I think that's a good way to transition into our final thoughts on the game, though.
Yeah.
Like just overall how this game has made us felt and like felt and continue to feel, and all those
Yeah.
emotions and whatnot. So I'll start off, and I'll give you the final word since you're the guest.
Sure.
I think this game it makes me feel a ton of different things. It provides so much. It's such a good example of why video games as a medium is such a unique art form. It's not trying to be anything else. You know, like I love Naughty Dog games, but a lot of Naughty Dog games are trying to be movies or cinematic in some way, shape, or form. And while that's not bad, I'm not even saying it's a criticism, but I think they lean more heavily into the cinematic side that video games have. And I think with The Last Guardian and a lot of what Ueda does in his games is that he really does a good job of realizing what makes games unique, in that the interactive elements and the sheer amount of time players spend in the worlds that are created can be used to his advantage in storytelling, can be used to the developer's advantage in storytelling, and he does that better than almost anybody. He in this game, like, you will spend hours in this world pondering over the environment and landscapes, wondering what is it there for, why are you there, what's happening, why is all this going on. And because it's alien, like I said, it forces you to be extra curious, because almost like a defense mechanism, like, I'm in a strange place, I better be on my guard, type of thing. Not just because I'm with this giant bird dog creature, but also because, like, I don't know where I'm at. And it causes the player the same thing, since it's kind of foreign, to like have the player look around, like, want to look around more, to learn more about their settings and their environment. And this game, you know, like, it makes you care about this creature. And I think that's something that is very hard to do, that lots of games try to do, you know, like, you know, with Last of Us and Ellie, with that game does a good job of it, but that whole game is about building the relationship between Joel and Ellie. And this game is about you building a relationship between you and Trico. And it nails it. It does it so perfectly, to the point where the ending it's heartbreaking and sad, and it doesn't feel pretentious either. Like, sometimes when games are trying to comment on something, like, there's almost a level of pretentiousness, like, look how smart we are. And Ueda's games never feel like that. It just tells a really wholesome, heartwarming, and sad story, and it's wonderful. I enjoyed this game quite a bit. I have issues with some of, like, the puzzles, and the final puzzle specifically, but it never was to the point where I was like, yeah, no, this game's bad. It always just kind of felt in service to what Ueda was trying to do. So I really enjoyed my time with this.
Yeah, I think that, if you were to think of, okay, so I have this creator, and they're making video games, they're making interactive art experiences. There's a lot of values, I think, that people have with, what do you want out of this situation then? So if this creator has chosen that they are going to make video games and not movies, or they're not going to write books, but they're going to make interactive experiences, I think one of the big values, especially when it comes to storytelling, is marrying the interactive elements with the story of the
Hmm.
game. And I think that this is one of the strongest parts of this particular director, um, Ueda. And I don't, of course, he's not the only person who works on this, but he is the person at the top of the credits, the game director. So it's it's just something that, like, all three of these main games in this loose trilogy do so incredibly well. The story they're trying to tell, even if it is quite simple in a way, it's so intertwined with what you're doing as the player in the game. There is no separating the player's interaction from the story of Shadow of the Colossus. You could watch a movie, but it wouldn't hit the same because you're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way in The Last Guardian. You could watch The Last Guardian, and I mean, how many kids' movies are about the relationship between an animal and a person, or two animals, or
There's a
something like
lot.
that? Yeah, there's
There's
a
a lot.
lot.
Yeah.
And so, like, you could watch it, but you didn't take part in that relationship building like you did in The Last Guardian. So, not to say that that's like the one true thing that all video game creators should strive for, but it is one of the things that I value a lot in a video game. And so, The Last Guardian to me is an absolute masterpiece. It's, um, masterpieces have their own flaws too, and we've talked about some stuff along the way. But I think that this game uniquely, whether it's by a happy accident or whether it's by the most intentional and fine-tuned design, those flaws reinforce the growing relationship in this game between the boy and Trico in a really beautiful way. It's like that particular thing, that one thing that this whole experience hinges on. Because if think about this, like if Trico was like 90% of the way there, but didn't work the same way, this entire game would fall apart. It would
Mm-hmm.
be a disaster.
Yeah.
And it's not. I mean, Trico works the way it feels like Trico was intended to work, and so because of that, it all comes together. And then you add in like this wonderful architecture, this grand scale of the place that you're in, this beautiful music, the great sound design. We didn't talk too much about that, but like the sound design of like the environments and the little chirps and vocalizations that Trico does, all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff is great. Like it all comes together. And you know Shadow of the Colossus gets all of the deserved praise that it gets. And I really think The Last Guardian is a masterpiece on the level of Shadow of the Colossus too. They're both incredible works of art. you know
Mm-hmm.
I almost don't want to say that, one of them is, it feels like heresy to say that Shadow of the Colossus isn't clearly the better game. But I really feel
I actually
strongly.
kind of prefer Last Guardian to Shadow.
Okay. Well, there we go. Like
I'll
it,
say it.
okay. You can say it. I mean, I hold Shadow of the Colossus at the highest level of video games, and I kind of also hold The Last Guardian up there too. Like this is, it's almost like magic, this experience. And I guess the last thing I'll say, because it's very clear at this point that I love this game so much, that this game, this creative team, right? Team, they used to be called Team Eco, now Gen Design. They
Yes.
make the most unique video games. It's like you don't see people trying to copy what they did. Like
No.
it's almost like people see that and they're like, "Fuck, we're just going to enjoy that. We're not going to try and copy this. We don't have Colossus likes or Last Guardian likes out there in the industry." Like it's cool to see. And I'm not begging for it either. It's cool to see that you have these people that just kind of walk their own path as creatives, and we end up with these magical experiences out of it. And we just got the what feels like the first word in forever about their next game at the Game Awards recently, and it looks so different and so cool. And like there might not be anything that I'm more excited about than their next game, because it's just like you play enough of them and you start to get a little window into what they value as creatives and artists, and you're like, I want to see what's next from them. Like, what are they thinking about? What have they been thinking about all this time since 2016? What is their next creative move? Because like, we talked about Eco, and Eco is my least favorite of the three. I still really liked it, but it was just like a little bit harder to connect with, I think, in some ways. The next one, I can't wait to see. Like, I just have so much respect. You can tell by how I'm gushing right now.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
have so much respect for these people and the art that they make.
And I think it's what makes Ueda's games so unique is that it's something just touching on something you said about how like some of the best games are the ones that are able to marry story and gameplay. Not saying that all of them have to, but I think that when you are trying to make something that is truly like a masterpiece of a medium, right? You have to be able to do everything that that medium does at least like a 9 out of 10 in every aspect, right?
Do the things that are special for that medium, right?
Yes. And like for example, like I love Mario games so much. I adore them, but like would you say they do story at a 9 out of 10 or higher? No. But
No,
do
but
they need to?
stories not unique to video games, right? So
Exactly. So, but when you're trying to tell a story, when you're trying to like marry all aspects that video games can do, um, Mario is not a good example because Mario captures joy so perfectly in its gameplay. That's a
maybe
whole
for
different thing.
some.
Okay, Mister Critical over here. No, but like with Shadow of the Colossus, with your games that like Celeste that I've talked about before, where like games that truly I think resonate like with on an emotional like on an emotional and core level to people are games that can do that, and I feel like they are so hard to do because it is so hard to and I don't know. There's just so few games that do it, and I feel like those are the ones that give you. Okay, how can I put this? You know how like some people get snooty about this is an art. When really it's like this is art versus high art. Like it's saying something about the human condition and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
feel like games that are able to do the when a game is trying to say something about the human condition, something very emotional, very deep, spiritual, whatever, what have you, it's when you're able to marry gameplay and narrative. Those are games that's the best way I've seen games do it. Whether it's Celeste, whether it's The Last Guardian, I'm trying to think of even other ones. I mean, I
Shadow
could
of the Colossus.
Shadow of the Colossus. I have not played it yet, but how Unpacking tells its story, from what I
Oh yeah,
understand,
dude. Yeah.
like
Yep.
I want to play that game so bad because I like puzzle games like that, and I love the fact that it tells a story through what you are packing and unpacking, and it's
Hmm.
literally like that seems to me like a perfect way to tell a story in a game on an emotional level.
Yep.
So I don't know. It just this game's fantastic, and I'm so happy I finally got an excuse to play it and to talk
Yeah.
about it. And I'm happy you came on for this one. This was a joy, man. I loved this.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing about
Yes.
what you were just saying there. So I think that like what people will say when you ask them, like what people who love video games will say when you ask them, like, why do you play video games? Why is it your favorite thing? Why are movies not your favorite? Why is TV shows? Why is that not your favorite medium of entertainment? I think that there's a lot of answers that people give, but one of the most common answers is the interactivity helps me connect with what's going on, especially if there's a story going on. And like, even if there's not a perfect marriage of story and gameplay, the fact that I'm an active participant in it helps me connect with what's going on more than if I'm just, you know, watching a TV show or something. That is the answer for me personally. And so when you do have games that do marry gameplay and story on that super high level, that's when you have these really lasting impactful experiences. And like I think that there are games that will have that sort of emotional impact without this great intertwined gameplay experience as well. I'm like thinking about stuff like 1000 times resist here in 2024, or Disco Elysium, I think, does marry gameplay and story, but not at that same type of level. But like those games have this extra layer to them that pushes up to the top as well. But like the ideal for a game that is, has a lot of gameplay mechanics and things and is trying to tell an emotional story is when those things, you know, boost each other up the way that that happens in The Last Guardian. And Celeste is another perfect example of this, in Unpacking as well. That's the good stuff. That's the secret sauce. So I'm glad that you brought up like that interactive element, because I think that's why a lot of us do connect with video games too, because we're active participants. And so when it is that good, when they are married like that,
Hmm.
that's the best. That's the good stuff. But
And
I've said a lot. Yeah.
well, and to just a real cap thing, something that I know we keep trying to end, but stuff keeps popping into my head. Um, there's games that can do one of those things really, really well, but not the other. Think of like, for example, like, I don't know, think of like Doom, right? Like Doom doesn't have like a phenomenal story, but its gameplay is so solid it doesn't matter. Um, it's got a cool setting and everything, but in general, it's like you're Doom guy. You're just constantly angry. That's what you are. That's the joke of it. But then there's also other games that like do only story and their gameplay kind of suffers a little bit. And I think some developers have smartly then, if they want to just tell a story and not focus as much on gameplay mechanics, they turn it into a walking simulator. And I don't mean that as a derogatory thing. I think there's a
No,
time and place
exactly.
for walking simulators. I love Firewatch. Firewatch was fantastic. There's a horror game that I think you actually played or covered somewhat recently from like the 2010s on Xbox. It might have been like a Capcom game or a Konami game. It is a Japanese game that's like everyone says has a fantastic story, but its gameplay is so fucking janky. It's like,
Oh, Deadly Premonition.
yes, Deadly Premonition. Thank you. And I've never personally played that, but from my understanding, that game kind of is like it's all story, no gameplay. Just not, I should say no gameplay. Like it excels in story, but suffers in gameplay.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would say that's accurate. Yeah. Yeah, you have a lot of people who have smartly, like you said, and I agree, made the decision that rather than trying to shoehorn in gameplay to our story, gameplay, traditional gameplay, right? We need combat, we need puzzles, we need platforming. Instead of trying to shoehorn that stuff in where it may not fit or where it just may not be the strength of the creators to make a combat system, a lot of people are making the smart choice to just not do that and just tell their story, focus on presentation, focus on writing, focus on the things they do well, and they end up with really, really awesome experiences out of it too. But and not to say that one is better than the other, because
no,
there's
no,
plenty of
yeah.
games like that have hit me on the same lasting emotional level that The Last Guardian did too. But like, since we're talking about The Last Guardian, and we do want to like really praise those games that marry these things together really well, this is a definite strength of this team. And like, what's interesting about this, things just keep popping up, like you said. We already said earlier that this game doesn't feel great to play as a like,
Not
controlling your
entirely, no.
character,
Especially the camera,
platforming,
man. So many times the
camera.
camera, like I'll be trying to go through a freaking like tunnel or like a doorway, and it'll get caught on the doorway.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not the most satisfying gameplay. It's not like you said, it's not like Doom or, Mario or something like that, where it's a joy to control the character. It's not like that. So like when we say perfect marriage of story and gameplay, we don't mean A plus story, A plus gameplay. We mean gameplay and story that perfectly complement each other and boost each other
Yeah.
up. That's the secret sauce for games like this.
That's so right on, man. I didn't even think about that. Where like you can have gameplay and story not be an A plus, but when you marry them together, all of a sudden both of them are A pluses because of how they complement each other.
Yeah, because
Like
they work together. You can't separate one from the other in this game.
that's wild. I never even that is like the sum is greater than the parts or whatever. The
Yeah,
sum is
for sure.
the whole of the sum is greater than the part, or whatever the fuck that expression is. But
Yeah.
Um, all right, we can wrap this up now. I think we've sufficiently tangented a little bit at the end there. I really enjoyed that though. This has been a wonderful conversation, man.
Yeah.
Thank you once again, as always, for coming on. And I like how beforehand we were talking about like we're both getting over COVID, and we're like, man, we probably shouldn't go too long. And now it's been 2 hours. Uh,
Yeah.
that's par for
I
the
just like
course.
talking about games. I like talking about games with you, man. So I appreciate the invite. And I appreciate all those coughs that you muted and cut out of the podcast earlier.
or that you muted for me beforehand, because I haven't heard that
Yeah.
many. Well, Dave, for my listeners who may not have heard your voice before this episode, where can they find you online, and what would you like to promote?
Yeah, so I am the host of a podcast called Tales from the Backlog. It is pretty similar to the episode that we have just done here today. Each episode is a deep dive on one specific game. It's always me with a different guest. So lots of different flavors in the episode. I'm the only constant on the show. And every episode, we really deep dive. The average episode's 2.5 hours long. And we really just get in and talk about everything that we want to talk about with the game. No spoilers for a while. We always warn you when spoilers are coming. We take a big long music break so you can leave if you don't want to be spoiled. And then after that point, we'll do mostly a story analysis, talk about big themes, big moments, stuff like that. And there's about 150 episodes in the feed at this point, so there's a lot of games to check out. I have done episodes on all three of Ueda's games. Eco had Josh here as a guest, so that may be a good place to start. I also did the episode about Shadow of the Colossus, and then I have my own The Last Guardian episode as well. But there's a lot of stuff there, all types of different games. I tend to gravitate towards stuff that has stories, but not always. I mean, the first episode of the show was about Rocket League of all games. So that's my show. I'm really happy with like the discussions that we have on the show, including the two that Josh was on. We did Eco and Chrono Trigger together. So those may be good places to start if people want to check it out. Otherwise, find a game that either you want to hear that analysis of, that deep dive treatment, or anything that you're like curious about but don't want to be spoiled, because you can always stop listening at that spoiler wall. Every
Yep.
single episode of my show has that.
And listeners, you hear me rave about that one episode where do games have to be fun? Go check
Yeah.
that one out. That's another great starter point. It's a great conversation. And Dave here is this is the host of the show I reference all the time. So you go check out his stuff. As for myself, of course, you can follow me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, at Still Loading Pod. I do technically still have my Twitter, but you have to request to follow me now just because I'm not really active over there. So if you're feeling like it, go for it, at Still Loading Pod over there as well. You can also follow me on Twitch at Still Loading Pod, where I stream I try to stream twice a week, depends on my availability. Though at the time of recording this lately, I've been pretty swamped with podcast and life stuff, but normally I try to stream Tuesday and Saturday nights. Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, and Tuesdays it's a little bit different. I stream with my buddy Andrew at the Experience Point over on his Twitch channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our Talk Tuesdays, which is a weekly like kind of talk show that we do. And then afterwards, I hop back on my own stream and stream whatever I'm playing currently. So you can check that all out at Still Loading Pod. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. 5-star rating review is probably the easiest. It sincerely helps small shows like myself, and it helps not just small shows, but larger shows like Dave over here, and just helping help more people find the show. It gives us the warm fuzzies, and that's always nice. So please consider doing that for both of us. It would really mean a lot, and it does help us grow the show. You can also support the show over at Patreon. I have a Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod, where if you, for your hard-earned money, you get some extra bonus goodies. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, along with patron voting rights. So like games like this, like topics like this, patrons help guide the direction of the show. And I do quarterly polls as well as a beginning of the year big backlog month poll, which I think when this comes out will already be done. But there's lots of polls and chances for you to guide the direction of the show, only for $1 a month. For $3 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior, plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get all the other tiers previously, plus 2 mini bonus episodes. And for $5 a month, you get everything I've already mentioned, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which changes depending on what's going on. But right now, we are in the midst of, actually just kicking off Still Family, my monthly Fast and Furious movie podcast, where all the guests who join me aren't just friends, they're family. And you can go check that out for $5. Not only get access to all those movie episodes, but also my Still Bonding series, which is all the James Bond episodes, covered all the James Bond movies. So there's lots of content for you over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But that's it. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Dave, thank you once again for joining me, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. Always a pleasure.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.